When the scapegoat child sees no gleam in their parent's eye. Do you find it hard to believe that others are excited to see you? Does life feel like a gauntlet that you have to navigate very carefully? Is it hard to pay more attention to yourself than your friends or partners? I've talked a lot about the harmful things a narcissistic parent does to a scapegoat child. The child, though, is also harmed via acts of omission by their parent. So that is, they miss out on the emotional and psychological nourishment that all kids need. Later, survivors may suffer consequences from not getting what they needed in childhood. In today's video, I discuss how the scapegoat child misses out on seeing a gleam in their narcissistic parent's eye. This is an essential ingredient to knowing that we are welcome in the world. I'll explain what life can feel like for the scapegoat child who's denied this experience. Then I'll discuss how the absence of this experience can play out in the adult scapegoat survivor's life. And last, I'll explain how therapy can help you come to terms with what was missed and find such gleams in other places. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in recovery from narcissistic abuse. I encourage you to watch until the end because I want to tell you about some important resources that are available to you if you grew up as the scapegoat child to a narcissistic parent. Finding a gleam in your parent's eye. Well, there's a famous psychoanalyst named Heinz Kohut who emphasized that the developing child must find a gleam in their parent's eye. Such moments consist of a spontaneously authentic reaction of pleasure and joy at the child's presence. Kohut argues that the child's repeated experience of being found this way is how the child knows they are lovable for the unique person they are. This is particularly important as the child grows and wants to explore their world. The child who has been the gleam in their parent's eye will expect to be received similarly by others whom they meet in their kind of big, wide world. This is what makes healthy separation possible for the child and later the adolescent. The child knows their parents' support will still be there as they move about the rest of their world. And the people they meet in their world are likely to offer similarly good receptions. The child sees that there's no break in how much they are loved when they empower themselves. Kids in this fortunate position learn that their development is heavily endorsed by their parent. These kids do not have to choose to make themselves or their parent happy. Doing the former, making themselves happy, also does the latter. Well, let's look at an anonymized case example to illustrate. Jeff's mother felt a strong pull to care for him the moment she saw him in the hospital. She wanted to make sure that he had all that he needed. She would patiently wake up in the middle of the night to feed or comfort Jeff as seemed necessary. She even enjoyed changing his diapers because of how she got to interact with her son in these moments. As Jeff grew, he became able to walk on his own. Although his mother felt some pangs of loss of the intimate bond she had shared with the more infant Jeff, she was excited for what he might discover in his own world. She respected Jeff's need for some autonomy and let him roam where he wanted to in certain areas of the home. But whenever Jeff would enter the room she was in, he would see his mother's eyes light up at him. He felt a rush of comfort, assurance, confidence, and love in these moments, as if someone had reached down and heartily endorsed his entire existence. Jeff became more emboldened to discover what was in his home because he knew that he would always find that gleam in his mother's eye when he came back to her. Jeff felt confident that the more most people got to know him, the more they would like him. After all, that is what was happening over and over in his home. This lended him a sense of safety as he navigated the world. He expected people to be happy he showed up, and this tended to happen more often than not. When there is no gleam, the scapegoat child is deprived of this gleam. Instead, the narcissistic parent looks upon the child with contempt. This has nothing to do with the child, but there's no way for them to know this at the time. Instead, the child has to collaborate with how their parent sees them. The scapegoat child has to live without the experience that their existence makes their parent happy. The child is too young to make any other sense of it than that they are just not enough to do this. They can easily form the unconscious belief then that they are defective, and this can create a long-standing inner depression. Another consequence of not finding a gleam in their narcissistic parent's eye is that it can become much harder to separate from that parent. The child learns that whatever hope for finding a gleam in their parent's eye for them is quashed the instant they go to explore their own world. So when you know in your bones that you are unconditionally loved, the prospect of separation likely means freedom, discovery, and empowerment. But for the scapegoat child, separation without knowing they are loved can make them feel like they are nobody to no one when they try to separate. To survive, the scapegoat child then may avoid separating from this parent. Well, let's look at another anonymized case example to illustrate this. Lucinda's mother decided to have a baby because all of her friends were having children. She did not want to be left out by being the only one without a child. When Lucinda was born, her mother felt very little. She was gratified by Lucinda's initial dependency on her. Taking care of Lucinda granted her mother a sense of power that was usually hard to come by. Her mother resented the caretaking duties that she found inconvenient, though. She found Lucinda to be a burden, except when she could show Lucinda off to her friends. Then she would shower Lucinda with affection and bask in her friends' compliments of the two of them. As Lucinda grew, her mother felt disrespected by Lucinda's excitement to explore her own world more than obey her mother's commands. Her mother routinely punished Lucinda for not listening. Lucinda grew to expect others to be unhappy if she pursued her own interests. Lucinda found no gleam in her mother's eye for her. As she learned to walk and entered a room her mother was in, Lucinda saw a darkening in her mother's eyes. This experience felt scathing to Lucinda. She wanted to hide instead of be seen by her mother. Lucinda felt that she was bad at her core and doubted her mother's love for her. Lucinda found that when she stayed near her mother in the house, she received less derision from her. When she tried to explore her own world, she would feel a cratering within. In those moments, something was telling Lucinda not to go any further with her explorations and to turn her attention back to her mother. So in contrast to Jeff earlier, Lucinda had to prioritize her mother's happiness over her own. At least this gave her hope that she might earn the gleam in her mother's eye for her that was so absent. Life as an adult without having been the gleam in a parent's eye. The adult scapegoat survivor is left with a painful deficit of what was needed in childhood in order to value their own existence. The child may cope by adopting unconscious beliefs that they are defective and undeserving. The deprivation and painful beliefs adopted to cope then leave the survivor with a grim quality of life. As adults, scapegoat survivors may find it difficult to know and cultivate their own interests. The inner space where they would do this is the place where they felt coldly ignored and insignificant to their narcissistic parent. The survivor may feel that similar danger as they move towards what interests them today. Similarly, scapegoat survivors may find it difficult to know who and what they prefer. They've had to surrender ownership of themselves because of their narcissistic parents' relational demands. It can be hard to know what and whom you prefer when you have to hold yourself at psychological arm's length. As a result, scapegoat survivors may find themselves at a loss when it's time to make their own decisions. This can apply to choosing what interests you in your free time or what qualities you want in a partner. Life can feel less fraught when they have something they are supposed to do. Now they don't have to go into that psychological no man's land of turning towards themselves. They can keep their attention on the authority figure's commands and get to avoid that pain of separation. Let's go back to Lucinda's example. In adulthood, she lived with a low level but near constant inner sense of anguish and despair. She had learned not to say anything about these feelings as a child and to live on in spite of them. She felt relatively safe at work and functioned well there. The wheels would come off on nights and weekends for her. During these moments, she felt like she was in a vast desert. She couldn't identify any striving within herself in one direction or another. She felt paralyzed by the excruciating emptiness inside. The only palatable option seemed to be to watch television. At least she could then feel a sense of relief from these feelings. She also knew deep down that this was not an effective solution, but a temporary salve or band-aid. How therapy helps scapegoat survivors find the gleam in other places. Well, nothing can change the fact that a scapegoat survivor was deprived of this essential ingredient for self-worth in childhood. There is, however, an opportunity to understand how they coped and determine if that adaptation is getting in the way of taking in new information today. For example, does a scapegoat survivor's unconscious belief that they are defective make it hard to notice how well they are received in their life today? And this is where therapy can be particularly helpful. Therapy can help scapegoat survivors come to terms with not having gotten the needed gleam in their parent's eye while freeing themselves to notice others' positive receptions of them today. As they take in current friends and partners' appreciation for them, it can feel less dangerous to find and pursue their own direction in life. They are less limited by the threat of going gleamless because they understand the source of their fear and they have new information that says they deserve others' deep appreciation and support, even when they are exploring their world. So back to Lucinda. She came to therapy with the hope that she could find more fulfillment in her life outside of work. Her therapist quickly understood that she had to cope with a narcissistic mother who did not offer Lucinda the ongoing support needed to explore her world. He reasoned that she might hold some unconscious beliefs that helped her survive that situation, but that now impeded her. He made sure to listen for signals that she saw herself as defective and undeserving. And when this would happen, he would act to offer her information that contradicted such beliefs. And here was one example. So Lucinda said, "This weekend was hard. On Saturday, I slept in and never got my day started." Her therapist said, "It sounds hard. What was going through your mind as you were trying to get your day started?" Lucinda, "Honestly, not much. I felt some brain fog and like my whole body just wanted to collapse back into bed." My therapist said, "The prospect of initiating some action that might bring you fulfillment was not appealing at all." And Lucinda replied, "No, definitely not. But when the evening came, I felt bad about myself for not having done more that day. The thing is, I don't know what I would have done. It seems like there's nothing inside me pointing me in any direction when it comes to my personal life." The therapist said, "What a tormenting dilemma you face. You are charged with finding something to do with yourself in your free time, yet feel no pull in any direction. If you resign to this, then you feel listless and like life is passing you by." Lucinda said, "Exactly. And I just don't know what's wrong with me." The therapist said, "Well, why would you assume that there's something wrong with you?" Lucinda replied, "Well, I don't see this happening to other people." And the therapist said, "Right. And the reflex is to attribute that difference to a defect within yourself. I think it's a lot less familiar to you to consider that this dilemma may have resulted from you having to cope with a very difficult situation in your childhood." Lucinda said, "Yeah, no, I don't see that when I think of myself. I just think of what's wrong with me." Her therapist said, "I think I understand what you mean. But from what you've described about your upbringing, you had to psychologically watch your mother at all times or else. And she was not fondly looking back at you. You gave so much to her and got so little, yet could not express any dissatisfaction. There was nothing you could do to get her to love and treat you the way most mothers do with their children." And Lucinda said, "I suppose not. That makes some sense, but I still just wish I could get a sense of inner direction on nights and weekends." And her therapist said, I bet. Right now, that feels too psychologically dangerous, but it's very much where you want to go. And she replied, yeah. Well, this account of a session with Lucinda reflects how therapy might help her know it is now safe to consider compassionate understandings of her experience. It would take several more years for Lucinda to test whether her therapist's goodwill and appreciation for her, in other words, the gleam, was compromised when she followed her own wishes. For example, she would learn later on that if she was a couple minutes late to session, her therapist did not grow punitive. And if she had to occasionally cancel sessions due to special occasions in her personal life, he would maintain his goodwill towards her. Repeated experiences like these gradually helped Lucinda know that she could be special to safe people in her life today. Well, before I go, I want to let you know about a new opportunity to further your recovery from narcissistic abuse. It's called the Rise and Reclaim Healing Toolkit for Scapegoat Survivors. And in it, you'll receive my book called Growing Up as a Scapegoat Child to Narcissistic Parents, A Guide to Healing, and a worksheet that offers a structured approach to organizing your recovery process, focusing on key areas of healing each month. You'll also receive the Quick Guide to Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse, which offers a concise, easy to follow guide that outlines the essential steps to start your recovery and regain control of life. You can find the link to the toolkit in the description box below. Well, thanks for tuning in to today's video. I hope you found it applicable or useful in your own process of recovery from narcissistic abuse. And again, want to thank you for your continued support and engagement with the channel and the resources around it. As I say every week, it's awesome to see the comments in the comment section and support offered to one another. And with that, I look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.